Despite any of my thoughts about the Cleveland Browns previously up to this year, I truly believe that this is a year for the Cleveland Browns to not only make the playoffs, but make noise as the team in the AFC North. I'm just going to start with the skill group that the Cleveland Browns have at their disposal. I think if you look at the rest of the AFC North, no, they don't have the number one option among that division. That would be Cincinnati with Jamar Chase. But I think if you stack up the supporting cast that Deshaun Watson or whoever plays quarterback this year is going to have with the skill group between Nick Chubb, Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, David Njoku, Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, who they had last year, there's no reason to believe that that is anything other than the number one skill group in the AFC North. And among the AFC as a total, there's very few teams that have a supporting cast for their quarterback that is better than Cleveland or even matches it. Jerry Jeudy might not be a top 15 receiver in the league, but Jerry Jeudy over the last 4 years with the Denver Broncos has proved to be a somewhat reliable option. I think one of the only downsides to Jerry Jeudy being on your team is sometimes he can't be on the field to play on Sunday. But other than that, if you're adding Jerry Jeudy to your wide receiver core, you're getting better as a team. And if he can be a second or even third option on this team, he could totally blossom into a guy who can star in his role as a really good number 3 option. And even saying that, he might be option number 4. When you look at what this team already had from last year, guys that were going, at least in Nick Chubb's case, was going until he got injured, you have Nick Chubb, Amari Cooper, and David Njoku on this team. 3 guys who last year were playing at Pro Bowl levels when they were on the field. And in David Njoku's case, made a case as the next best tight end not named Travis Kelce or George Kittle last year. So let's talk about also when you bring up guys like Chubb, Cooper, and Njoku, who they bring over from the roster last year. Let's talk about some guys that they added to the roster over this offseason. I already mentioned Jerry Jeudy, who was traded for from the Denver Broncos. You are adding players to this offense, like wide receiver Jamari Thrash, who not only could be a solid rotational piece. Outside of Jerry Jeudy, he's the only wide receiver that was added to this team. So you have to think he's going to be a guy who maybe he doesn't play, but he's definitely going to get developed, and he's going to see a lot of guys ahead of him, like an Amari Cooper, who's been doing this for a very long time, like a Jerry Jeudy, who's eager to prove himself as a wide receiver in this league. You have David Njoku, a really good tight end. This could be a spot for Jamari Thrash where he has experience playing special teams with Louisville. That's going to have to be how he earns his spot going forward. And then he has to hope he's going to be able to develop to get some snaps ahead of those guys that I already mentioned. In free agency, this team did really well as well. When you pair up the losses that they had to the additions and the guys that they were able to retain, I would say that they added more than they ended up losing, except maybe in the linebacker room, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Offensively, you didn't add guys that are going to start probably, but you're adding guys who are going to push the starters every single day. You add guys like Deontay Foreman and Naheem Hines, who are probably going to have to play if Nick Chubb is not available to go week 1 for this team. But they're also going to be guys that are going to bust their ass every time that they're on the football field. Quarterback Tyler Huntley is an interesting addition. You have to think that Tyler Huntley is going somewhere where he thinks he's going to have a good chance at playing, considering he played pretty well in his moments where he had to play for Baltimore. So, another guy that's going to push the starter to be their best and give 100% every day. Other than that, like I said, not any starters probably. Jordan Hicks and Devin Bush on the defensive side of the ball will be added. And then Quentin Jefferson as well. But offensively, not many additions that you're going to look at and say are starting outside of Jerry Jeudy. Mike Hall Jr. was the only major defensive addition in the NFL draft this year for the Cleveland Browns. You're looking at a guy who's going to be sitting behind Dalvin Tomlinson, Shelby Harris, and probably Quentin Jefferson as well, who they added to the team this offseason. That's probably a perfect position for a guy you're getting in the second round who already brings pretty good production from his time in college at Ohio State. Not to mention you're getting a guy who's been in the Cleveland area for the last 2 or 3 seasons for Ohio State. And he was a pretty good player at Ohio State, so you know the Cleveland Browns fans are already going to love him. When you're looking at the rest of the defensive additions, I already mentioned Devin Bush and Jordan Hicks, who they added to replace the linebackers they lost in the offseason. I don't love either one. Jordan Hicks is a good 2.5 down linebacker in today's NFL, but I don't know if he's a guy that you're always loving in pass coverage. Devin Bush, fast player, hasn't had much workout for him, but you hope he can do something with Cleveland. Other than that, it's depth pieces. It's Tony Brown. It's Justin Hardy. There's not a lot added defensively. And when you get to the guys they retained, this list is a major list when you compare who they kept to who they lost. You keep Zadarius Smith, you keep Shelby Harris, you keep Maurice Hurst. That's pretty good. You keep some very major pieces to your depth for your defensive line, who's going to be, the major piece for this defense. You kept those guys so that you can keep a fresh D-line, so you can keep getting after the quarterback late into the season. The dominance for the Cleveland Browns last year lied heavily within their defense. You're looking at a team that every statistical category, even down to how often the opponent scored against the Cleveland Browns, they were either first in the league in, top 5 in the league in, or at the very least, they were in the top half of the league at that category. 13th in points allowed this year, 5th in turnovers, 1st in passing yards allowed, 11th in rushing yards allowed. They had teams take the least amount of time on their drives against them. They gained the least amount of yards in the league. They allowed the least amount of points per drive in the league last year outside of one other team. This is a defense that would shut teams down on the defensive side of the ball. And they added to it, I would say. They added depth to it. They lose their linebackers in Anthony Walker Jr. and Sione Takitaki, who were major pieces for this team defensively. You replace them with Devin Bush and Jordan Hicks, and you also draft Nathaniel Watson out of Mississippi State. I don't know if they are going to be prepared to stop the run as well as they were able to do it last year. And you're seeing Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah become the guy in that linebacker room. He has a vet with Jordan Hicks, but, he's the guy. And he's the most athletic guy on that team at the linebacker position. And he's probably supposed to be the guy. But that's just the story that Cleveland is faced with. And they, as a team, are going to have to rally around the fact that there's a good chance, A, because of how well they played last year, but B, because, they're not going to be the same defense as a fan base and as the Cleveland Browns organization. They have to realize their defense is not going to be as good as it was last year. They're still going to be great. They're still going to be very, very great. But they're not going to be as good as last year. And that's honestly not that big of a insult. I really don't believe so, at least. Let's go ahead and take a look at the schedule for the Cleveland Browns. Weeks 4 through 8 are up there in terms of toughness for this team. 3 straight road games where you go to Vegas, Washington, and Philadelphia. 2 beatable teams, but also you're on the road, and it's going to be 2 teams who are eager to prove themselves. And then you're going to Philadelphia. Then you come back and you play back-to-back games against Cincinnati and Baltimore. That is a 5-week stretch where a lot can go wrong. And a lot can be said in the media afterwards about how this team lost 1 of 5 games on this last little road trip paired with a couple games at home, and they're already looking at a 3-5 record, or they're already looking at a 2-6 record after week 8. And I'm just going to say it, with Deshaun Watson on this team, I think when stuff goes wrong, it's going to get a lot worse before it looks any better. We saw that last year, and we've seen that almost every year with Deshaun Watson, where everything gets to a pretty high point with the drama, and then it's just like, bam. It's another 7-10 season. It's another 6-11 year. Now, last year they were an 11-6 team. And yes, they played great defensively. But how long are they going to be able to just rely on this defense to be as shut down as possible just to see their other team put up 2 touchdowns in a playoff game, and they get beat by 31 points to a rookie quarterback? How many times is that going to happen before everything just kind of implodes for Cleveland? You add that to the last half of the schedule after they come back from bye. They have 2 divisional games where they play on Thursday night. They have 2 other primetime games where they're at Denver on Monday night and against Miami on Sunday night. A lot of their major games are not only going to be primetime games, but they're going to be like those 2 Thursday night games where I mentioned that put you at a huge disadvantage. The Thursday night games, I don't get it. They go to New Orleans, and then they get a Thursday night game. Then they play Kansas City, and then they go to Cincinnati for another Thursday night game. It just seems weird that they would do it this way. But at the same time, if you're Cleveland, you have to play the schedule that you're given. And if you can't win 10-plus games, you're probably not making the playoffs. And I just think that that's kind of the world that Cleveland's going to be in the next couple of years while they still have Deshaun Watson at quarterback and they can't get the next guy in the draft or they can't add the next guy in free agency. That's just kind of going to be the type of year that Cleveland's going to be faced if Deshaun Watson is still a quarterback. I really see a floor for this team of going 5-12, 6-11, but the ceiling of this team is still 12-plus wins. This team went through Deshaun Watson, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Joe Flacco. How many other quarterbacks played? P.J. Walker played 2 games. Jeff Driscoll started the game. You just have to understand that Cleveland is not going to be able to keep doing this, where they don't have, first off, they don't have Nick Chubb for all but 2 games last year. They still win 11. They still win 11 games last year. And actually, they won 10 of those games after Nick Chubb left. So it's like, they can't keep doing it. They can't keep getting away with it. I don't know what that sounds like, but they just can't keep getting away with these 11-win seasons when they just aren't that good offensively. So yeah, anywhere from 5 to 12 wins is totally attainable for this team. I can see this being like the biggest difference between win totals that a singular team could have, but I think it makes sense with what this team is, and it makes sense with where this team has been the last few years with Deshaun Watson at quarterback.